Hey, what's going on, social media world? As you can tell, I just got my hair cut, and I got it cut a little differently than normal. I got the beard. I got rid of the beard. I got rid of my beard. I was keeping my beard around, but then I just had to say, you know what? Time to just go honest and get rid of the beard. No, I'm punning here, but I'm not really telling the truth as far as the pun because I don't have a beard. Sorry. Anyway, so today's video is that was a joke for a select group of people. Today's video, oh, so the washing machine stops, is about Chris Brown and then Rihanna and then me and my relationship with them. Um, it's not really about their relationship per se, but I was actually driving and listening to this old CD that I had, this old mix CD of MP3s of albums that I own, but I put them on MP3 CDs so I could play them in the car. And I was listening to this old one, and I came across Chris Brown's album. And it's interesting because Chris Brown's first album. It's interesting because when Chris Brown's first album came out, I was like in college, like my junior year or something like that. I'm pretty sure it was the junior year. Yeah, that I came out, that his album came out. And I forgot how much I really liked that album. And I even was listening to old, I used to be an on-air personality for the student radio station and for the student online radio station. And I remember listening to some old broadcast that I have on MP3 and listening to myself talk about Chris Brown and his album and how I was like, Chris Brown is bringing R&B back, like back then. And I was like, Chris Brown's got a lot of talent and he's going places. I said it years ago, but I was like, Chris Brown is bringing R&B back, kind of. And in my mind, it's funny. A couple of things are funny. One, I'm just going to say this because I realize it is not true, but at the time, I could have sworn that Chris Brown and Trey Songz, but I realize that's not true at all. But anyway, I also thought it's funny because I thought this until I listened to Chris Brown a little bit more and listened to Tevin Campbell a little bit more. I used to think Chris Brown was like the next Tevin Campbell because he's up in that high range. But when you listen to Tevin Campbell, you know, no tea, no shade to Chris Brown. But when you listen to Tevin Campbell, Tevin Campbell's like a whole new world of vocalist compared to Chris Brown. And I think even Chris Brown would admit that. So that's not anything brand new that Chris Brown would be like, how dare you imply that Tevin Campbell can sing better than me or sing differently and do more with his voice than me. And again, Chris Brown is a talented vocalist. He is. So anyway, all of that to say, I liked he is. He's a talented vocalist. It's interesting. I was thinking as far as his range compared to Tevin Campbell, how would I compare them now that I listen a little bit more closely? Chris Brown has his upper range, but it's kind of like a holler, which is pretty cool. That his voice is kind of thin, and I'm not saying this in a bad way because I'm saying also that thin voices nowadays are actually very marketable. But it's interesting how Chris Brown has that thin voice, kind of, but he's still up there hollering. Like if you listen to his voice, he's like hollering. But it just works for him because even in his holler range, his voice is still kind of thinner, you know, as opposed to like, you know, you think about the great gospel vocalists when they holler. Compare those two hollers. You know, it's completely different. Chris Brown's holler is a lot thinner, you know, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Again, that's very marketable nowadays. But the thin voice is very marketable nowadays, and the fact that Chris Brown is able to be singing out like hard and still have a sort of thin sounding voice. It really works for him. While Tevin Campbell, when he gets up there, it's sort of different power dynamic vocally. I don't want to, it's like not a raspy holler. Like he's belting. Tevin Campbell can belt, but it's not a holler. You know what I mean? So anyway, whatever. So I was a fan. I forgot how much I was really into Chris Brown at that time, and he had a pretty significant period of time between that album and his second album. And I'm not saying that I'm one of those people who forgot about him or anything like that. I didn't. And his star was still big, but I remember just not being that into his second album. I loved his song "You." You, you, you. When I was with you, you, you. Nobody like you, you. Whatever, like that song. Whatever that song was, I loved that song. That was the jam. And I grew to really like Take You Down as well. But the album overall, I just never really got that into it. My roommate at the time, because at that point I had graduated college by the time that came out, and I had roommates. And my roommate at the time was in love with the album, but I just didn't get into it like that. And it was at that point that I sort of was just no longer really that into Chris Brown like that at the moment. And as far as Rihanna is concerned, I was big on Rihanna from the first album. I was one of the first people who, when I heard that album, I was like, no, she's not a one-hit wonder. I remember talking to one of my associates, friends at the time, about Rihanna, and I was like, yeah, I just got that Rihanna CD, and I really, really like it. He was like, Rihanna? Who, that Pon the Replay? Like, what, that one-hit wonder? And I was like, I've listened to this album. I don't think she's a one-hit wonder. Like, she's got some stuff. I think she's going to be around a while. I said, that's funny. I did say that about Rihanna and Chris Brown. And look, boom, I was right. And that was years ago when they first came out. See, I have an eye for talent. Stick with me, kid. So anyway, yeah, so I was a fan of Rihanna's, definitely, from the first album. I did not like Pon de Replay, and I did not. I think the only reason I got the album was it was on sale or something for $9, which is how much albums cost when they come out. But I was impressed with it, so I was like, you know what, let me go ahead and take a chance. And I got it, and I loved it. And I was big on Rihanna since then. And then after I graduated, she came out, because that came out when I was still in college. But then after I graduated, she came out with her. No, her second album came out while I was still in college. Okay, that's right. Her second album came out my senior year. So whatever. And her second album came out, and I was in love with her second album as well. I was just big on Rihanna. And then she came out with Good Girl Gone Bad after graduation. And I was just like, that is my album, and I was just in love with Rihanna. And every magazine cover that she would take, she would be diva, and she would just get it. And I was like, she might not be able to belt like Whitney Houston, but her essence, her presence, just gives me Whitney Houston, and I just love that. Like every magazine cover, she'd be so classy and elegant and beautiful, and I was just like, yes, Rihanna, get it. But and like I said, Chris Brown had his album at that time, and it was a cool album. I just wasn't that into it like that. But then came that fateful day, and this I'm going to mention this because this is something a lot of people probably don't remember. And this is probably why it really wasn't intended for that to happen. Rihanna, her lead single to her album that was coming out after Good Girl Gone Bad was a duet with Chris Brown, and they had already started playing it on the radio, and that was my jam, that duet with Chris Brown. I only heard it a couple of times, but every time I'd hear it, I was like, that is the jam. This song is a hit. This song is going to do it. It's going to do it. Yes, yes, yes. I'm so excited. Rihanna is back, and at that time I was still like big on Rihanna, and I was like, Rihanna is back. And okay, and Chris Brown is back, on this song. I dig it. And then that event happened, and everything changed. And Rihanna actually talks about it in that song, Mother Mary, on her newest album, the album that I do like by her. Again, Rihanna's getting back into my good graces. Um, I'm not going to make this more than 15 minutes, so I'm going to speed through this last part. But so yeah, they had that fight and everything, and I felt badly for Rihanna even at the time because radio refused to play Chris Brown, period, at that time. And I remember thinking to myself, that's really hurting Rihanna as well because her lead single off of her new album is a duet with Chris Brown. So the fact that radio refuses to play Chris Brown means they're also refusing to play Rihanna's new song, which kind of was difficult. So Rihanna had to sort of regroup, and Chris Brown laid low for a while, wisely, and did producing and stuff like that. And Chris Brown's a talented individual. I'll say that. But then Rihanna came out and she did exactly what this radio station. I've already talked about this, so I'm not going to go into detail. But I remember being upset with Rihanna because the radio station was like, I'm sure what she's going to do is she's going to use this situation to come back and like be all edgy and hardcore and all of that stuff as her way of getting back at Chris Brown or whatever. And I remember listening to that and saying, no, Rihanna's going to do better than that. She's not going to take that route. She's going to be classy, maintain her upscaleness. She's going to say, this was something horrible that happened and women shouldn't have to put up with that stuff. And I rise above and just do it very classy, elegantly, speak eloquently, and all of that. And she did not. And she completely changed it. And I remember being upset with her at that and not being into her because of that. And yeah, that's right, because Chris Brown wrote that song Disturbia for Rihanna. So yeah, Rihanna wasn't, like, her people weren't really expecting that to happen. And that worked, and that just didn't work out too well. But then Rihanna changed her image, and I sort of fell off from her. And Chris Brown sort of laid low for a while. And as I mentioned before, I wasn't that into his second album, so I had sort of fallen away from him musically a little bit. And I realized that, let me just say this about Chris Brown. I'm not saying this in the order that I wanted to say it in. But one thing I found interesting about Chris Brown and Rihanna is when you watch them on Punk'd. I used to like Punk'd because it shows you how people, even though I think they would do some really whack things to some people, it shows you how people react in certain situations, and you sort of get to see a realer side of them, so to speak. Like Raven Simone and Hilary Duff, all the Disney people who they punked were like amazingly classy and just handled every situation. Like, I remember Hilary Duff, it was a situation where they said she had hurt like some old ladies or something. She was like, oh my goodness, what do you mean? Like, is there anything that I can do? What's going on? Let's take care of the situation. I want to make sure that everyone's taken care of, blah, blah, blah. Like even Raven Simone, when they had her with the thing, I think I think she was the one that had the old lady situation or something. And she was like, oh my goodness, what's going on? I want to make sure that everybody's taken care of, blah, blah, blah. But with Chris Brown, and I remember being disappointed in Chris Brown's reaction because even though I hadn't really seen him in interviews, I always thought in my mind that he was like working with Clive Davis. So I thought that he would sort of just have that way of presenting himself with class in his interviews, like male Whitney Houston, so to speak. I love Whitney, so I'm sorry, I can't help it. But I remember when I saw his Punk'd, it was like something that happened to a girl at a restaurant, and one of his fans got a fan dinner with him, and they gave her food or something that made her sick, allegedly. And I remember him talking to the manager, and I thought he would handle the situation like, this is something that we need to take care of. She's here. She's my fan. This is something important. And I think it's unfair that you serve her this food, blah, 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 blah. But instead, he like went off. And that was my first sign. I'm like, oh, Chris Brown. I don't know about that. But he was like, what do you, what? Because they tried to blame it on him. And he was like, what do you mean it's my fault? What you trying to say it's my fault? Like, this girl, waste of time when I dropped the flipping camera, right? I'm trying to finish this in as few minutes as possible, but whatever. He was like, so what do you mean? This girl is here and she's saying such and such and you saying such and blah, 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 like just running off at the mouth, all sorts of like, you ready to fight? What you trying to fight? And I was just like, Chris Brown, really? Like, seriously? And I thought he would just handle himself with so much class, and I just remember being really disappointed in that. And I was just like, oh, well, I guess he's just another ghetto boy. But I'm kidding. But he did handle it, and it was just strange. And to me, it was the sign that Chris Brown, oh, I hope this effing sound works. The sign that Chris Brown wasn't the good, sweet kid that I assumed he was, even though I had no knowledge of anything related to Chris Brown, really, outside of that. Anyway, so, but I remember Rihanna was really sweet. Like she handled herself really well, and I remember that made me love Rihanna even more. Like they put her in some stupid situation. All the situations were stupid on that show, but it was an interesting show, interesting enough. And I remember Rihanna just handled it with so much class. And I remember the woman was saying, like, trying to cuss Rihanna out. And she was like, you know what? I understand that you've had a difficult day and you've dealt with some difficult things, but God's going to bless you. Have a good day. All right? God's going to bless you. See ya. Okay? I can't deal with this. Be blessed. Have a good day. Thank you. Like, Rihanna handled it with so much class. So then when she came out as the whole brand new Rihanna, I was just like, I'm not buying it. But anyway, so yeah, a very, 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 very long story shorter. Both Rihanna and Chris Brown have sort of come back into my good graces, so to speak. I like Rihanna's latest CD. It's a little angry for me a lot of times, and sometimes I'm just like, you know what, I don't need to get extra angry. There's enough that goes on in life. It just sort of, the album just sort of has an angry sound to it. But at the time that I'm okay for listening to like angry sounding music, I really genuinely like the album. And as far as Chris Brown is concerned, I got his Fame CD. And I like some of the stuff on it. It's a nice album, But that was just interesting. That was that. This video is super long. Thank you all for your patience. And I think that's it. If not, I'll make it a part 2 or whatever. All right. Talk to y'all later. Peace. Be blessed.